Don Bluth is one of the most famous and perhaps infamous movie directors in animation history, as his films were and still are very well known for pushing the boundaries to their limits when it came to what was acceptable for children's entertainment. What they might be just as well known for, however, is getting seemingly dozens of very watered down sequels that lacked everything about the original that made them good, mostly because Bluth himself was never involved in them. And indeed, if you look at his filmography, almost all of his movies follow that same pattern. If the first one was a huge hit, then a soulless sequel inevitably followed. However, there is one movie of his that's an exception to this rule, with that being Anastasia. Because while it most certainly did get a direct-to-video sequel, what makes it different from all the rest is that it actually was directed by Don Bluth. And today, I'd like to go over the movie in question, Bartok the Magnificent, and see how it stacks up as being the only sequel Don Bluth ever did to one of his movies. And as always, there will be spoilers ahead for both this film and Anastasia. So in case you'd like to check either of them out first and don't want to know how they end, you should probably turn off the video. Okay, so just to get everybody on the same page, 1997's Anastasia depicts the lost Russian princess having to deal with the evil Rasputin, who's determined to wipe out her entire bloodline for past wrongs. And while he's doing all of this, he's accompanied by a wisecracking albino bat named Bartok, who's not all that enthusiastic about his master's plans and sees his failure coming a mile away. Now, the villain's sidekick being a scene stealer is really nothing new, especially in animated movies, as when done right, they can be absolutely hilarious. But Bartok proved to be so popular that the studio decided to give him his own spin-off movie, Bartok the Magnificent. Functioning as a prequel of sorts, the movie basically shows what Bartok was up to before he met Rasputin, having his own sideshow act and selling his supposed greatness so well that he ends up having to live up to his own legend to save the Russian monarch from a terrible threat. Yeah, this movie isn't all that concerned with lining itself up with the original Anastasia, about as much as that movie was with being historically accurate, really. So at first glance, the movie seems like your typical Don Bluth sequel, a direct-to-video follow-up of his most recent popular film centered around the unexpected popularity of one of its characters. But for reasons perhaps best known only to the man himself, Don Bluth, as well as other Anastasia director Gary Goldman, decided to work on this film themselves. And so the question must be asked, does it fare any better than most of his other sequels because of that? And the answer to that is a pretty complicated one, mainly because it depends on what standards one is holding the film up to. Because on the one hand, it's not terrible. It's a watchable, harmless enough way to kill an hour. But at the same time, it still has all the hallmarks of a typical direct-to-video sequel to a theatrically released, critically acclaimed movie. The animation is of an inferior quality. Its ties to the original story-wise are rather questionable, the songs are lackluster compared to their predecessor, and overall everything is just a lot simpler. To put it generously, nobody could ever say the studio was robbing it of any award nominations by releasing it straight to video. Though ironically, they were so impressed with it that they actually did consider releasing it in theaters and only didn't because Don Bluth begged them not to, saying it wouldn't hold up to scrutiny on the big screen. So with all of that established, it's actually not that bad by the standards of an animated direct-to-video sequel, because as I detailed in another video, which you can find a link in the description to, it's debatable if even the best of those were actually good movies or not. And where Bartok the Magnificent has a leg up on most of those others is that it just has this indescribable charm to it that keeps it from feeling totally soulless and corporate. Like, for example, a criticism often lobbied against the film is that despite getting his own movie due to his popularity in Anastasia, he doesn't act much like he did in the previous film. Though given the fact that he's meant to be the smart aleck straight man and sidekick to the villain, and here he's supposed to be the hero of a children's movie, a personality change was kind of inevitable. But either way, the point is that despite that criticism, it doesn't actually handle his character too badly. Because at first he's simply a carny putting on a soft con for profit, but then lets his conscience get the better of him when he's called upon to be a genuine hero. And even though he's most definitely not the best at it, he still is ultimately able to prove himself worthy of his self-given title in the end. And the movie even pulls an interesting subversion in regards to his becoming more heroic, as towards the end he's given a potion that transforms the drinker into, quote, who they are on the inside. But instead of Bartok drinking it at the crucial moment and showing that he was good all along, the villain is the one who drinks it and ends up quite famously turning into a terrible dragon as a result. But despite that, Bartok is still able to stop her and prove his worth anyway, showing that he didn't need the potion to reveal his inner goodness. But now you might be wondering, what does all of this have to do with anything? And the reason I bring up this drastic change in Bartok's character is that it's something a lot of animated direct-to-video sequels do. But whereas most of the time it only serves to their story's detriment, here it's actually done pretty well. Sure, maybe most would have rather seen Bartok behave more like he did in the original, but at least this movie has something to offer in its place rather than change his personality just for the sake of it. And not to mention, the rest of the cast is populated by quite a few colorful characters that are backed up by a rather talented cast of voice actors, as well as also having some interesting twists to offer, with about half of them not appearing to be who they initially present themselves as. So as I said before, if nothing else, at least the movie tries to be interesting and compelling to sit through, unlike so many other animated direct-to-video sequels, which don't even try to hide the fact that they were simply made to make their company a quick buck. But once again, that still can't make up for the fact that its production values are most definitely a step down from the original, even with Don Bluth at the helm. Because apart from the obvious stuff that I went over before, there's also that the characterizations are a lot simpler, lacking the complexity and conflicted nature of some of the characters from the original, with quite possibly the exception of Bartok himself. Because sure, there are a few twists regarding some of the characters, but once the curtain is pulled back, what you see is what you get, and everybody is pretty much good or evil with no in between. But at the same time, that isn't necessarily a bad thing either. As I've stressed in many other videos, too much complexity in children's movies can be a very bad thing, and having something more on the simple side is good, and even healthy once in a while, especially because the movie doesn't insult their intelligence. It just doesn't challenge them like Don Bluth was known for. In the end, it almost feels like the type of film Don Bluth would have made had he been tasked with making the lightest, most kid-friendly film he possibly could. And again, the results could have been far worse, and does carry a distinct charm all its own. So with all of that being said, Bartok the Magnificent definitely can't live up to its title, but as an animated direct-to-video sequel, it's actually surprisingly decent. Though given their reputation in general, that's not really saying much, but it still arguably cleared that bar even if it wasn't a very high one. I mean, it's not trying to be on the same level as Anastasia or Don Bluth's other films. It's simply trying to be a fun little movie starring everybody's favorite albino bat. And on that front, it does do a pretty good job. And the fact that it did have Don Bluth himself at the helm is probably a major reason for that, as given how sequels to his films are generally known to go with few exceptions, this film would have probably been doomed from the word go if he hadn't been involved. To put it simply, Don Bluth could have obviously made a much better sequel if he had wanted to, yes, but the movie he did make is nothing to be ashamed of either. Okay, I think I've made my point with all of this. So now I'd like you to tell me, do you believe that Bartok the Magnificent is a decent movie for what it is and worthy of being the only sequel that Don Bluth ever worked on? Or do you believe it was terrible and doesn't deserve such a distinction at all? Please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And remember, you don't have to agree with anything I said here just because you watched the video. You are entitled to your own opinion and can feel any way about Bartok the Magnificent that you want to, and I nor anybody else can tell you you're wrong. And thank you all for watching. I very much appreciate it, and I hope to see you all next time.